What are the Saints offense going to look like on Sunday in London? That more this week on Audible Live. Matt Waldman's on assignment. So I got an OFBG, Jason Wood. And let's start out with a game. It was a spirited game. It was an interesting game. And then it became kind of a somber game in Cincinnati.
Yeah, I mean, right before we signed on, Siggy, Tua took a big hit. One of the Bengals defenders threw him down and just was almost like a wrestling suplex right onto his back, like his tailbone, and he was shaken up. And the next thing we knew, he was being pulled out on literally a stretcher with the whole team out there. So, obviously thoughts that he's okay. It's just an abundance of caution. But Teddy's in there now, and Tua wasn't playing very well before the injury, so the Dolphins are scuffling. And then as we were signing on to the show, Burrow, who was not having a great game himself, just hit T. Higgins for a big touchdown. So they're at 14-6.
You have to think that the Dolphins emotionally are definitely going to be a different team after the injury than before. But watching this game, and it's interesting to say, Tua, you had an interception because he underthrew a deep ball. Sound familiar? You also had not necessarily the crispest execution, but what was really exciting to observe was, we had the first week against the Patriots, and maybe we should put a little more respect on the Patriots defense, but also that it was the first week in Tua and McDaniel's offense. Week 2, we saw them outlast the Ravens. And that was where it gets exciting, because it reminded me, Jason, of your Chip Kelly Eagles, where you really, what you do is the first 3 quarters are basically to wear down your opponent. So the mistakes they make, mental mistakes or physical fatigue in the fourth quarter against a cheetah and the penguin, you're not going to be able to keep up with them. And we didn't get to see last week. Well, first of all, I got to put respect on the Buffalo defense. It's going to be really interesting to see how they do against Lamar Jackson. But you didn't get to see it last week because the Bills had 40 minutes time of possession, and they had a bunch of backup defensive backs in. But then you saw again tonight, the way this offense spaces the field, I have not seen much like this, right? I mean, it looks like the 15, 20, 25-yard passes are like the 5 and 10-yard passes for a lot of teams. And Tua was putting it there. He's putting it there to Gesicki. He's putting it there to Tyreek Hill a few times. And it was just exciting for the default of a pass offense to be going downfield and being a really dangerous pass offense. So a few runs. I think this team is just not going to have enough sustained drives to make Chase Edmonds, who dropped a pass or almost had a pass in the end zone, and Raheem Mostert, who's running well. I just don't think this is going to be an established the run team. Maybe that'll change come December. Maybe it changes with Teddy Bridgewater in there because he's not exactly known for throwing downfield. But they could have easily had 14 points, 17 points when Tua was in there. The Bengals looked pretty powerless to get home before those downfield passes were coming open. On the Cincinnati side, you saw, I think, them doing the right thing, just like they did last year in the middle of the season. You circle the wagons, you run the ball, you try to get in makeable down and distances, because Joe Burrow was just getting hit like a piñata back there. Some of it was the offensive line, some of it was him. And then, like you said, they take that shot to T. Higgins. And another thing noticing this year, by the way, T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, roughly the same value. I think you're going to see that, not necessarily that Chase was terrible to take him in the first round, because just about every first round pick, you're questioning yourself these days. But Higgins, a value there. And until week 17 last year, they were basically even in points per game. And then Chase had that massive game whenever the Bengals boat raced the Ravens. So, we'll see. And this sets up some of the storylines for this weekend, right? Because you got the Ravens, who had that game against the Dolphins, going up against Buffalo, and Buffalo's defense looks still pretty good. And a good game. Well, first let's talk about the Saints, and then I want to get to your Eagles. So we have the Saints. We don't know who's going to start at quarterback, and you are very familiar with projecting and having to commit to data points. So when it comes to the Saints offense this week, how dramatically will it change between whether it's Winston and Dalton, and how will it change?
Yeah, it's a great question. Obviously, you and I are both in the same boat there. We have to figure that out and provide our best case analysis. I mean, I'm currently sitting here expecting Winston to play, um, but obviously it's very much fungible, and we'll have to see how the Friday practice reports go and the like. But yeah, I mean, we were talking in our internal communications channels this week about the Saints, and I listened to your On the Couch, as I always do, and you guys were kind of debating this idea of how two very astute fantasy analysts can look at the same game film, the same data, the same box scores, and come away with very different conclusions. And I think we're seeing that a bit in the way your guest perceived Winston, and in the way I guess I perceive Winston this year.
Right.
I mean, he was very bullish on Winston's downfield throwing and the aggressiveness, and he had a bunch of metrics he was pointing to, and all those are very valid. But Winston's always been an aggressive downfield thrower. Like, that's never been the problem, right? The problem has been that he makes poor decisions, he forces throws, and he leads to a lot of really bad turnovers. And he's got 5 interceptions already this year to 4 touchdown passes. So you project that out, as we need to do for the site, and it's ugly, right? It's certainly not a pace where, if this continues for another month, that you could credibly say he's the right guy for the job. But the problem I think we have is that Dalton isn't really any better historically. I mean, Dalton is absolutely prone to throwing tons of interceptions himself.
Right. It's like starving to death versus throwing yourself into a fire.
Yeah, exactly. So
you're gonna die either way.
It really, I mean, if Dalton plays, it's really a roll of the dice, because Dalton has now carved out a bit of a second stanza to his career as like the high priced veteran backup who somehow always finds a way to get on the field at a bunch of different stops now. And he's just had wildly different outcomes. There's just really no discernible pattern to it, right? Some games he's looked great, some games he's been abject disaster. So I will put it to you this way: if we get a sense before, if he's not a true game time decision, and we can adjust accordingly. If I'm projecting Dalton in the game, the Saints all take a bit of a hit, with the one caveat that I'll have to run the numbers, but there probably be a bit of a higher volume for the receivers. But even that, I think I'd probably still downgrade him a bit based on changing the projected catch rate and whatnot. So not very excited about. I'm not very excited about what I've seen of the Saints to date.
No.
Anyway, right? I mean, Kamara looks, well, God, I was going to say Kamara looks like a shell of himself, but what running back doesn't look like a shell of himself other than Saquon Barkley? I mean, Barkley looks like the MVP right now, and it's only 3 weeks, so everyone calm down. I'm not saying he's going to win the MVP, but he looks fantastic. I mean, he looks like a true, he looks like he's got the breakaway back. He's also seemingly script proof so far, which is always a nice thing to see. But every other running back, Sig, as you know, has just been a disaster. I mean,
except for James Robinson and Nick Chubb.
That is true.
Those are your winners. That's it.
That is true. James Robinson. I was listening to our Dynasty boys on their podcast talking about Robinson, and one of them mentioned, I couldn't remember which one of them said it, but they said that they bumped Robinson back into the top 25 of Dynasty running backs, and I was like, I just updated my Dynasty rankings, and Robinson's 11th.
Right.
Like what league are you looking at? Like, what more do we need to see of James Robinson? He's got a new coaching staff, a new system. He's back from an Achilles, and he is absolutely the best player on that team. So I don't know why you shouldn't treat him like an every week fantasy stud for as long as he can stay healthy. I don't. What more do we need to see?
Nothing. No, and you'll get to watch him against your Eagles this weekend, and we're going to talk about that game. But yeah, I think with the Saints, and I meant to say this, but so many things slant through our gourd when we're on the couch, that the thing about Jameis Winston, like you said, what Ian was pointing out was just from a fantasy standpoint, a quarterback who's just taking shots downfield at will is what we want, right? And that's going to create that bigger fantasy pie to divide up. And it was really, if you had Chris Olave, we were in a best case scenario. But what I meant to get out there, my brain moved on something else, was that really puts Winston in danger of being benched, because I think what you're seeing is solve for X being Sean Payton's effect on Jameis Winston. Because what did we see last year with Winston? He was disciplined. He was actually processing the field in a more deliberate way. They had low pass attempts, right? Low number of pass attempts, high efficiency. I think there was a game last year when he had like 17 pass attempts and 4 touchdowns or something
Yeah.
like that.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And so you could see, and why would he? And the thing is, you thought it made sense because why would Jameis Winston take so little money to play for the Saints? Well, it's because he would get to work with Sean Payton and could rehabilitate his career. Now we're back to the Bruce Arians Winston. Now Bruce Arians reportedly would have taken Winston back,
Right.
if Brady wouldn't have come there. But the point is, this Winston, especially with Dennis Allen, and there's a whole other tangent we could go on Dennis Allen. Not a lot of great things. People do not have good things to say about him in his stint as the head coach with the Raiders. So we'll see. But I think you're right to say all is not good in Saints land. And we thought, offensive line, Pete Carmichael, the DNA of Sean Payton, offensive-minded thinking at least was in this team. It doesn't look like it. Winston had a good fourth quarter against Atlanta. Basically, that's it. That's it. I mean, that's really it. And you wondered if a quarterback change was coming anyway. Now, as far as this Sunday goes, like you said, nobody really truly benefits. Maybe Alvin Kamara simply because Andy Dalton will be disciplined and check down to him.
That's fair.
And then we'll see about Jarvis Landry if Michael Thomas is out, because Landry is another one who works that short intermediate stuff where Dalton is probably going to. So you could easily see like a 9 for 79 kind of line from Jarvis Landry. But at the same time, I think that you're probably going to see a small production pie from this offense. This is not only is it not a good fantasy offense, it might be a bad fantasy offense.
Right, especially because of the balance. I mean, obviously Landry and Thomas got dinged last week, so it's a bit of a statistical outlier, but it's still notable to me that Callaway caught a touchdown and Tre'Quan Smith at 100
over 100 yards.
Right? Yeah. I mean, and obviously that wouldn't have happened if the starters didn't get hurt. But you've now seen all 5 active receivers, and I think Tre'Quan wasn't active for the first 2 games, so his first week active. But you've seen their top 5 receivers all have fantasy relevant weeks, and then by virtue of that all but guarantees that they'll have a lot of weeks that are complete duds.
Yeah, and even Juwan Johnson was getting involved. So we'll see. As far as the quarterback decision, all the Saints beat writers took note that Taysom Hill was getting reserve quarterback snaps.
Right.
And that is at least preparation for not being with Winston. Not necessarily expecting that, but Winston was supposed to practice today, or at least that was the expectation.
Yes.
So we'll see. And it's a game against Carolina. That's not exactly good. I'm sorry, it's a game against Minnesota. So they're going to have to put up some points.
Yeah.
That's some bad memories for Saints fans too. You got the Minneapolis Miracle. By the way, Dalvin Cook was wearing a harness in that playoff game, that they lost. So those 2 games, Minnesota versus New Orleans. The New Orleans fans have a list.
You all do, yeah.
And then Atlanta's at the top of the list. Atlanta's at the very top of the list. Like I joke that when somebody dies in New Orleans, like you send a 28-3 flower arrangement to the funeral to cheer everybody up. The Vikings are on that list. The Rams are on that list. The 49ers are on that list. And that's just how it goes down here. Okay.
By the way, Teddy just drove him down to it for a touchdown to a shovel pass touchdown to Chase Edmonds. So
wow.
Those of you who had what a desperation Edmonds play, he's now 2 weeks in a row by virtue of touchdowns becoming relevant again. And I will tell you, I have a tremendous amount of shares of Chase Edmonds this season. So I'm happy to see it, although admittedly he's not in many of my lineups this week. But
no. And again, he could have had 2 touchdowns in this game, but he's not going to be, there were some visions maybe that Mike McDaniel figured out that Chase Edmonds is exactly the right guy for his system, and they went and got him right away.
I bought into that.
And look, the thing is, we'll never know in a lot of these cases, Jason, whether we were right, but the player just didn't do his part, right? Chase Edmonds just didn't actually follow through. But I think that, again, what's going to be interesting is, and something to think about now that we're at cruising altitude 3 weeks into the season, is it's still going to keep changing. Running backs being miserable. Well, come December, running backs are going to be a much more important part of their offense than they are now. Or the running game and establishing the run is going to be more important than it is now. Things are going to change. But this Miami team does not look like a team that's going to be even balanced, really. And why should they if they've got Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle? And what is a good thing about Teddy is that that if an offense, if a playbook, if personnel, if play designs create advantages, Teddy can harvest those advantages. Teddy can handle that. I mean, he could be a Garoppolo type of quarterback. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, Teddy has always been, as you know, but our listeners probably don't. I'm a Louisville Cardinals college fan. That's my college team. So I've always had love for Teddy, but I haven't been his biggest proponent in the pros because throughout most of his career, he's just been very reticent to pull the trigger. He's been almost too safe, and that's really, really hamstrung him both as a fantasy producer and unlocking the potential of his offense. But there was that 4-week stretch in New Orleans with the Saints where I don't know if he saw a hypnotist or he just got a good pep talk, and he had that 1-month streak where he was playing like a different quarterback. He was aggressively throwing downfield and looked amazing. And we all said, well, if that was this light bulb moment mid-career and this is the new Teddy, he could be an all-pro. But unfortunately, Turtle went back into the shell. And so we know he has it in him. Like we saw it for a month, but it's a month of a pretty lengthy career at this point. So can he harness this incredible offensive talent? I sure hope so. It would be a great story. I mean, I'm rooting for him for sure. And again, we don't know. Tua may be back next week for all we know. But if Teddy does have to play for a long period of time, it's not the talent. It's just that thing in the back of his head, the willingness to take risk, right?
Yeah. And I think he almost has the mentality of a backup quarterback who comes in to not lose the game.
Right.
But at the same time, you mentioned surroundings, and look at the difference for Tua having different coaches, different system this year. I mean, he definitely looked more confident than he ever did previously with Miami. And with Teddy, what we saw is, and that was when Teddy was riding his bike to the Superdome. It was one of the great things in New Orleans. That you like for sure, like people were talking about, like doing it, like Rocky coming up the stairs, like everyone's going to get on their bike and follow him he would ride his bicycle to the stadium on game day. How can you not love Teddy Bridgewater? Teddy Bridgewater, by the way, South Florida guy. So it's kind of cool that he's down there. Lamar Jackson, also South Florida guy. It's kind of cool that there's that connection, that Louisville connection for you. It's cool that he's getting to do this for the Dolphins and be the guy at a time whenever everybody's so excited. After last week, Dolphins fans as excited as they've been since like Dan Marino was the quarterback. I mean, it was a real high point for this franchise after last week. And Teddy, Tua getting hurt is kind of like a heart attack. And Teddy says, I got the defibrillator. Our heart's still beating. And he can be the heart of this team. And at the least, what Teddy can do is have a fast processor and get the ball out quickly and accurately to set up run after catch opportunities. And that's another aspect of this offense. There's a stretching the field vertically and creating all that space for the vertical passing, but also they're setting up players for run after catch opportunities. And Teddy can at least do that. Look, I mean, if you have your starter go down, Teddy Bridgewater is about the best you could ask for.
Absolutely.
In a backup quarterback right now.
Absolutely.
And it might not really hamper the offense that much in terms of production, but it also might take away that checkmate fourth quarter kind of game script they had against Baltimore. Okay, well, I got to ask you, because you're always good, unlike me, at trying to take emotion out of this. But I've got to ask you, because I think it's safe to say that the most dominant team through 3 weeks are your Philadelphia Eagles. Is this the 2022 Eagles, or meeting Doug Peterson and the Jags, who were one of the it teams right now, also is going to bring expectations down, bring everyone back down to earth?
Probably the latter, just because it's the NFL, and the NFL is a humbling, maddening game. That said, I do try and stay stoic about these things, and it is only 3 weeks, but I will say that there's no way that an Eagles fan could say that the first 3 weeks didn't go just about as well as we could have hoped for, right? Aside from the fact that we're undefeated, clearly, but just the big question, of course, was, were the coaches able and willing to open the offense up? And was Jalen Hurts going to be capable of executing that offense? And again, a lot of things we say in week 3 are going to seem really dumb when we look back in another 10 weeks. But based on what we've seen, all things look great, right? And we heard it all during the training camp. As you know, I cover the NFC East for Footballguys during the preseason, and cover all the camp news. And certainly, if you paid attention to what was happening in camp, we had every reason to believe they were going to open up the offense. But it's still much different when you're wearing the red jersey, not being able to be touched to game time. And I have to say, I mean, probably the most encouraging thing for me as a fan of the team is that Jalen Hurts dominated last week with only 20 yards rushing, right? And again, it's very early, but certainly not only did he have a big game without running the ball, but the other nice thing is that first week he was so just laser focused on AJ Brown, which is totally fine because AJ Brown's a dominant player and we're paying him $25 million a year. But to see basically AJ Brown be a complimentary piece and Devonta Smith play like the star he was drafted to be, it's just very encouraging. There's been a lot of plays made by a lot of different people. They've definitely shown some creativity in the play calling, which is nice to see. So all in all, I'm thrilled with the first 3 weeks for sure, and expect them. I mean, I'm expecting them to beat the Jaguars, but we have a long way to go, right?
That's why, like the Bills, after the first 2 weeks, if they just could have played the Super Bowl in week 3, will kind of
exactly. Yeah, I mean, look at no one would have thought the Bills would lose, and those of us that are in survivor pools, it's been a very humbling start to the season.
Right.
So,
well, it's something that I've pointed out a couple of times. Is I feel like the theme for the first 2 weeks, not so much for week 3, was in the NFL. No matter how much of an advantage you have, if you emotionally let down in the fourth quarter because you think you've already won, these are professionals and you're going to lose. You go into the ring with your gloves down, you're going to get decked. And there are a lot of outcomes that seemed shocking because I think teams were checking out and just thinking, we got this game. And you can't get your emotional level back up after you do that. When you realize, like, oh no, the game isn't over, like the Jets and the Browns, things like that, the Ravens and the Dolphins. But I think with the Eagles, just to put a cap on that talk, one of the things you love seeing, and this one of the reasons that I was bullish on the Eagles from a fantasy standpoint, Jason, and basically telling people, invest in the Eagles, whether it's Hurts or Brown or Goddard or Devontae Smith or Miles Sanders, until he said, "Don't take me in fantasy." So there's our there's our one case study for that. When a player says, "Don't take me in fantasy," actually, it might just be that he's frustrated, which can be a good thing. But what we saw last year was rational coaching, right? Nick Sirianni. Who would have thought that Nick Sirianni would end up being one of the most brilliant hires? But rarely do we ever see an offense reinvent itself mid-season. And that you can do that when you have an offensive line like the Eagles had, although last year they had a lot of injuries on the offensive line. And now you see, and I think this is another thing that we can remember, because a lot of people are saying this, don't assume the Eagles are going to be run heavy because they were run heavy last year. And in fact, their moves sure make it seem like they want to be a more pass first offense. And sure enough, that is what they wanted to do. And Jalen Hurts, and my takeaway on Jalen Hurts, Woodrow, is that he has already had to prove people wrong so many times.
Sure.
So many times he's already been told you can't do this. And he's had to make his
lost his job to Tua. I mean,
right.
Speak of the devil, right?
Yeah, he lost his job to Tua, and then he had to come back in when Tua got hurt in the SEC championship game, and he won, and then he had to transfer, and then he fell to the late second round, which in NFL terms is the NFL saying you're not a starting quarterback. When you fall that far in the NFL draft, they're saying we don't think you're a starter. And even last year, you could see that his smoke would come out of his ears sometimes as a pocket passer. But you set him up, and this is the lesson for, we'll see if this works for Zach Wilson, right? You set him up with enough talent. Now, Zach Wilson doesn't have an offensive line that Hurts has, but you just see that Hurts is playing with such inner calm, and he's a leader. And I think the team responds to him, and this is going to be really exciting because their defense is really good too. Their defense, they've got good players at every level. They finally picked up some linebackers this offseason, getting C.D. Deuce, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. That's the kind of guy that lights the fuse. You always want that one player who draws personal fouls because they're retaliating for things that he does. And it's going to be exciting. Philadelphia and Jacksonville, I mean, these are the two of the hottest teams in the league right now.
Yeah, and with Jacksonville, I mean, I definitely wasn't probably not alone in this, but I was nowhere near as bullish on the Jacksonville turnaround as I should have been in retrospect. And all credit to Doug Peterson. I think a lot of Eagles fans share my view that we view Peterson quite fondly. I think he's an excellent coach. He's brought the city its one and only Super Bowl. The circumstances that led to his departure were just it was a very odd time, right? Where it was like he versus Wentz, and then we ended up getting rid of them both. And I will say one thing about the NFL is there's so much luck involved. And perfect example of that is, as you know, Sig, I mean, you mentioned the Eagles offensive line. It is one of the league's best, but we spent a first-round pick on Andre Dillard to be Jason Peters' replacement, and Andre Dillard is a bust. But where we got lucky is that we drafted Jordan Mailata, who is a converted, this
rugby player,
and was a 7th rounder and as developmental a prospect as one can ever imagine. And the odds that he would ever see the field on Sundays, much less be the starting left tackle, were astronomical. And whereas we whiffed on a first round pick that, normally if you miss on your left tackle prospect or have a bad left tackle, it's a problem. And we ended up finding this guy who was this diamond in the rough, and now he's at least based on accolades and to whatever extent you want to give PFF grades credit, one of the best left tackles in the league. So there's a lot of luck there, right?
You create your own luck, though.
No doubt. But I'm saying these things have to fall into place, right?
Sure.
If you had told me, Woodrow Andre Dillard's gonna be a total bust, I think, well, I mean, that's part of our downfall.
Right. Titus Howard was going to be a better pro than Andre Dillard.
Yeah. But it is what it is. And I will say, getting back to the Jags, I mean, I'm sure Urban Meyer would still at this moment be handed almost every college job if he wanted it. But I don't understand how anyone on the earth can think that he's still got it as a leader of an organization.
Right.
I mean,
yeah,
it's just embarrassing doesn't begin. I mean, he turned. I mean, I wrote a very detailed player spotlight about Trevor Lawrence this preseason and framing it as just, we all know he had a bad rookie year, but it was historically bad, as was Fields and Zach Wilson, by the way. The three of them have arguably 3 of the 5 worst rookie seasons in the last 20 years. Unfortunately for that draft class. But I just said, there's no historical context for a player of Lawrence that played as much as a rookie that Lawrence did and had his poor performance to ever be good. I mean, the best comp that was left out of over 50 comps was basically Jared Goff, right? And of course, Jared Goff's having a bit of a renaissance, but you didn't draft Trevor Lawrence to be Jared Goff.
Right.
And the one caveat was
first overall, though.
and the one caveat was, but Urban Meyer, and I thought, he's definitely a lot to blame, but can you blame him in totality? And in retrospect,
yes,
even though this is a thing where 3 weeks into the season we can say definitively yes, in retrospect, Urban Meyer created a completely dysfunctional, toxic environment that robbed everyone on that roster of their true potential.
Yeah, the morale. And it's funny, too, because Jared Goff's first year, remember, was Jeff Fisher's last year.
Absolutely, sure.
So it's another example. I mean, we put so much on stats. After all, fantasy football revolves around stats. But every stat is a collective stat. We assign it to a player,
right?
But it's a collective statistic. It's a statistic, and it's a statistic, as we're talking about, that also reflects the coaches, not just the players. So with Trevor Lawrence, it's great to see not just him doing well, but in an offense that is aligned with his strengths, stalked by players. Trent Baalke, I've been saying this as many times as I can for the last week, Jason. I was wrong. Trent Baalke, keeping Trent Baalke, whoever made that call, good call, because he's got the right players like Christian Kirk and Zay Jones. Hope Zay Jones is okay. He's got an ankle issue. We'll see about that. Mm-hmm. But they're doing the things they do well, which is the kind of offense that Trevor Lawrence runs well. And you mentioned Doug Peterson, and I remember how the Eagles, when they won that Super Bowl, said, hey, you can win with love. It doesn't have to be everyone's miserable, everyone's afraid of making a mistake. It's that we love each other. And I think that made him the exact right coach to bring in after Urban Meyer. And the last thing I'll say, as I've said many times on the show, is those that know will tell you off the record that whatever, you could be the biggest Urban Meyer hater. And by the way, if you are an Urban Meyer hater and Fox College football comes to your town, try to make a sign about him, because they said, no, we just don't want any inappropriate signs. So more of those inappropriate Urban Meyer signs, please, because I think that you're right, that nobody should think that this is somebody that should be leading anything, because anything you hear from people that were there off the record, it's worse than you think. Whatever you think it is, you can be the least charitable person. There's a lot of things like that in America. It's worse than you think. Mm-hmm. All right. I'm going to throw it open, make it a little on the couch here for the last 15 minutes.
Sure.
Because like you've been talking about, we both do projections for every team in the preseason through the offseason, really.
Yeah.
And because of that, we have to commit to one data point, but we're always thinking about the range of outcomes. What so far through 3 weeks, Jason? What has genuinely surprised you?
I mean, a lot of things is the simple answer. I think that to do projections and rankings like we do for as long as we've done, it is a humbling thing, right? And at some point, if you're going to do this long enough, you have to accept that you have to embrace the error, right? There's just a tremendous amount of error, and you've said it on the show a couple times recently, and I completely agree with you. The trick, and I think like the wisdom of a little maturity in the business is not auguring in to the point of detriment. You don't want to give up on months of analysis and thoughtful curation of how you think things are going to play out. But you also have to accept that when presented with something that is in clear contrast to that, you have to be open to switching very quickly and saying, what did we really know? Because a lot of the preseason stuff is based on assumptions, particularly in an era where now it's pretty much a foregone conclusion that 8 to 10 NFL offensive play callers are going to switch every season. So roughly a quarter to a third of the league we're completely flying blind, and even just in terms of how they're going to call plays. Are they good at calling plays? Are they going to be run? What is the run pass preference? And so there is just a tremendous amount of like throwing darts to begin with. So getting to your question, I mean, I think the thing that's really surprised me, and we joked about it a bit ago, is just the ineptitude of the running game. And I don't know, Sig, if we should take a long view of this, if this is just a byproduct of the way that the collective bargaining agreement in the offseason is handled now. There's just very little tackling. There's much less physical practicing anymore. And while that's theoretically good for keeping players healthy, and I'm all for it, there is a bit of there's a bit of a will to a want to running the ball, right? And I feel like we've kind of had this atrophy where a lot of teams just aren't very good at running the ball, particularly early in the season. Now they're just it's not the same. There's an art to passing. There's a rhythm to passing that you can pick up much faster, even with new teammates, that you can't when you're running with the offensive line and that toughness. And I wonder if we're going to just continue to see the game become more pass efficient, and running is going to be considered something you just have to do just enough to keep defenses honest. So that's been very, very, it's been surprising in the sense that I feel like maybe I shouldn't have been surprised, but I am surprised because like all of my models for running stats are like way off base. like no one other than like you said, Chubb and Saquon are coming close, to what I thought they do, both in terms of player and team.
And the Lions running the ball well too. Deuce Staley.
That's true.
Deuce Staley. I mean, it was Ted Nguyen. Ted Nguyen does awesome stuff over at The Athletic. I think he was breaking down how their first 5 running plays a couple weeks ago were 5 different concepts, which no teams do that. I think that there's another layer there too about trusting your players, but I think it's Deuce Staley. Remember, they had 2 or 3 backups in the interior offensive line while they were doing that. And I think it puts the defense on skates, because I think the defense, there's, like you said, Nick Chubb, there's the Browns where they just execute so well. And Nick Chubb is so fearsome to have coming at you that, I mean, this is Nick Chubb. I think people have finally come around to the Waldman point of view, which is basically like he's the best running back in the league. I mean, we're talking about running the ball.
Right.
He's the best running back in the league, and he's in a scheme that really accentuates his importance because they're a face forward. Although Jacoby Brissett looks outstanding. That's a surprise. I'll tell you, that's a surprise.
That's an excellent one. Absolutely. Yeah. I think that he is, if you're a Browns fan or even the Browns front office, you're thrilled at how well he's executing that offense now. And let's put aside the the moral ambiguity or what you think about Deshaun Watson and whether you can or can't root for him. But from just a pure on the field evaluation, I mean, if you're a Browns fan right now, you have to be thrilled at the idea of what that offense can look like.
They should be 3-0.
Watson. Yeah.
So, and they're going to play Atlanta this weekend too. So Jacoby Brissett, he looks really good. And I think this is another one of those situations where in a different offense with different surroundings, he's meshed with the Kevin Stefanski offense. He's on the same page with Amari Cooper. You can see lots of chemistry there. And by the way, I'll point this out because this is file this under things we wish we would have known earlier in the offseason, right? Amari Cooper and watching the Cowboys and saying, wow, they could use Amari Cooper. And strangely, they actually ended up having a lot of cap room going into the season. So why exactly did they trade Amari Cooper? And somebody was asking Ed Werder on Twitter this. I don't know if you caught this, Woodrow.
No.
They were asking Ed Werder. There had to be something to it, right? There had to be something to it, something else. And Ed Werder said, well, the owner was not happy that Amari Cooper was not vaccinated and missed 2 weeks because of COVID. So if we would have known that in the offseason, then maybe we would, because there's just some thought maybe that Dallas just did some internal evaluation and thought he's just not worth that anymore. He's just not, we thought he was worth that, but now he's not. Yeah, more to the story. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I mean, I've always been a big, I've been a big Cooper proponent, and even with that in mind, I mean, I thought after the Watson suspension became official that it was going to be a tough year for Cooper. I really did think that he would struggle to be fantasy relevant as anything more than like a wide receiver 3. So definitely wrong on that. We mentioned it, but certainly have to be surprised at how well James Robinson is playing.
Sure.
And that's
medically.
I love to see it, and also very frustrating to me as someone who completely bought in on Travis Etienne. His comeback story, and that's certainly not panning out. He's like the one Jaguar who's disappointing draft ADP expectations. So that's a bit of a frustration. A little surprised, honestly, Sig, in how terrible Matt Ryan looks. I mean, I didn't expect Matt Ryan to look like the MVP again, like he did a few years back with the Falcons, but I really did think that he was all the good things that Carson Wentz brings to an offense and none of the bad. And he, I mean, he's looked like one of the worst 5 quarterbacks in the league. I mean, right. Yeah. Just, he's never been particularly mobile, but completely just like cement in the pocket and just not making good reads. And, you know, it's maybe we overestimated the quality of the offensive talent there, particularly once Pittman got dinged up, but yeah, he so surprised on that. And, you know, one that we need to give acknowledge to, and even though your normal co-host covers this with plum, shocked at the ineptitude of the Broncos so far, and particularly Russ. I mean, I forget where you had Russ ranked, but I had Russ, I think QB9 in my final preseason
8, 9,
rankings.
10,
was from a personal standpoint, it was perfectly comfortable drafting him. You know, if I waited on a quarterback, absolutely had no compunctions with taking him as my projected starter and felt good about it. And even with the assumption that he wasn't going to run much anymore, and he's looked like the Russ we saw last year in Seattle, and Geno Smith's been more effective as a passer through 3 weeks, and who would have thought that? So that's another big surprise. And I still tend, I don't know where you sit on this, but I still tend to think that I don't know if the Broncos are going to be what we hope they would be, but I still think they're going to be better than what we've seen. But I am a little scared at how quickly it seems like the Denver faithful and Illuminati, including Cecil, have soured on the coach, on Hackett. So I don't know if there's something there that maybe this will be a lost cause. I certainly hope not, because that's an offense that we thought was a quarterback away from being dynamic.
Right. They had everything set up for him.
Yeah.
And this comes into narrative. I'm the mayor of Narrative Street, so
that's true.
But look, narrative belongs to fantasy football, because
for sure.
I'll tell you where narrative always belongs to fantasy football. When we look backwards, you should be able to craft a narrative to explain what happened. Right? It's not just numbers. It's not just because you plug the numbers in and the next iteration of the numbers comes out. These are real human beings doing real things. There are real stories behind why things go the way they go. And we thought Russell Wilson has been held back the whole time in Seattle. Right? He's never been with a coaching staff that wants to accentuate his talents at the center of the offense. And last year, he busted up his finger. So things went south last year, but before he busted up his finger, he still pretty much looked like Russ. Everything was going to be okay. But no, it's not okay. And I think that, you know, some of this you can look at. Tim Patrick getting hurt didn't help. If you listen to Cecil, he says, give Judy 2 more weeks. And he hints that Russell Wilson is very frustrated with Jerry Jeudy. So if you just have Courtland Sutton, well, we're right back where we started, right? Russell Wilson is piling an offense that should go through the backfield. Russell Wilson is piling an offense where he should throw the ball 25, 30 times a game. And it can still lead to winning football. Their defense is performing well. And certainly they have 2 good running backs, and they can get their running game on track. But it is back to the run, setting up the pass. The more things change, the more they stay the same. And then there's also a part of it just that I almost wonder, it's so interesting, right, Woodrow? We're in the age of brands, your personal brand, right? And you
Yes.
almost wonder Tom Brady is going to go down, I think, as one of a true one-off in the way that he has balanced all of these different things. He really might not be human. He may be an android at this point. He really, like, if he's like the Terminator, right? Like if something happens on the field, we'll see like circuitry underneath his cut or something like that. But with Russell Wilson, you almost wonder if there's two games going on. There's like the game and winning, and then there's like the Russell Wilson brand, and everything with the Russell Wilson brand is on track, right? And if these guys, especially quarterbacks, if they're smart, they know they can make a lot more money after football, even with the $30 million or $40 million contracts. They can make a lot more money after football on their name, basically, and how recognizable they are. They don't even have to really do anything to add value to something, right? So I don't know. You don't get the feeling with Russell Wilson, and you didn't necessarily get the feeling back in Seattle that he was a guy that was a leader of truly a leader of his team, or someone that inspires his teammates to raise their level of play, compared to, say, like a Joe Burrow, as we're watching this very close game here early in the third quarter. So many interesting things. I do think that you're right to point out, like, it's not just the running game that are not getting going, although again, so if there's some fantasy takeaway from this, there is a time, we're in the window right now, to maybe buy a few of these running backs cheaper, because they will become more important as the season goes on. There's just no doubt about it. I think Josh Jacobs is a good one, for instance. I think, just really simple stuff like the Raiders have scored 6 touchdowns. He doesn't have any of them. That's going to change.
And not only that, but I agree on Jacobs for another reason. We had, I think, lots of anecdotal reasons to worry about his role, right? In the sense that new coaching staff, new front office, brought in a couple of new backs. McDaniels, in as much as how he ran things in New England, was one of the kings of the committee. So a lot of us, I think, had said, well, Jacobs is okay as your a late RB2, ideal RB3, but don't count on him being a workhorse. And to your point, I mean, while he hasn't put up huge fantasy stats yet because he hasn't scored touchdowns, he is the clear 3-down back there, at least so far. I mean, he's staying in for third downs and obvious passing situations. They clearly are using him in a way that if those touchdowns if we do see positive touchdown regression, he is going to be a value pick for sure. So I'm with you. And the interesting thing is he could be just a straight up street free agent this coming summer. And given his age, he probably will sign one of those incentive laden deals with a team. But he could have a nice renaissance if he goes to a team that's going to use him. He could be something special. I actually have this idea that he's going to end up with the Chiefs next year and be a fantasy stud. But
Eagles.
Maybe, yeah, quite possibly, sure.
I still think Trey Sermon may have something to say in this Eagles backfield before it's all said and done this year.
I was really pulling for Waldman's favorite, Kennedy Brooks, but
it just shows you that they're in alignment with Waldman, that they had Kennedy Brooks in as UDFA, and then when Trey Sermon came available, they got him.
Yeah.
And the Eagles, I think, are an excellent example of a team that they know how to run the ball. They know how to do power running, and they will flip a switch as the season goes on and have that more as again, on the front facing element of their offense, which is going to make them more dangerous. So the point in all this is, right off the bat, you have to be flexible. Right off the bat, you have to be ready for things that you weren't expecting. And a point I've made a lot, and I know since you're listening a lot, and if we're making a show that Jason would have listened to, then I know something right, is that if you're emotionally bothered by things that are happening in the first few weeks because they were counter to what you thought was going to happen, that's valuable information that your emotional intelligence is giving you, that you might be quicker to adopt the new reality than people who were more on the fence about things, because you can feel inside like, I was wrong. Like the other thing that I dismissed is actually happening. But it changes. As I've often said before, you can be right and wrong in the course of the same season. You can say this is never going to happen. I mean, you can say I'm going to fade this situation because of these downward pulling factors, and those factors will take control of the situation. And then someone else who says, no, those things can be overcome because of this, this, and this. Totally. Well, they end up right, like by November.
One of the things that is the trickiest doing in-season projections is how much you trust what's happened before, including your preseason model, but also historical production of the team and the players, and then how much you take into account what's happened this year. And there is no perfect answer, but certainly people far smarter at these kinds of regression analysis, including our own Adam Harstad, have really concluded that, you need about 6 to 8 weeks, depending on the position, of in-season data before that becomes more predictive than year N-1. So the reality is we should still be trusting what we saw of players do in 2021 and before, more than we've seen in these 3 weeks, as much as it's very hard to do that when you're caught up in the moment. But then it does switch over in a few weeks, where you should really almost be completely abandoning what's happened before, because the reality is the reality. And our job in the meantime is to try and use what we're seeing with our eyes and the context and the narrative to kind of meld the two and find a happy middle place, right?
And I love Adam Harstad. I'm so happy he's on our staff. I'm so happy to call him a colleague. I will say, though, one potential pitfall with that, and I believe actually specifically Woodrow, because I've cited him on this one, it's actually ADP, not the previous year's stats.
That's
ADP,
right. Thank you for the correction. That's an important correction.
Because ADP represents our collective predictions. Right.
Very good. That's right. That's an important difference. Yeah.
So it's like our collective predictions, which bakes in these things. And the thing is, something that is changing compared to when that data was compiled is, I think the league was less fluid and dynamic in the offseason. I think there were fewer changes in coaching. I think there were fewer changes in quarterbacks. Think about what these, we've had breathtaking off seasons for the number of important players changing teams.
Yep.
And then it's up to us with our ADP to correctly gauge how that's going to change things. And we're doing all right. I mean, we're doing the best we can, but our ADP might not be as reliable when we're forecasting these wide range of outcomes because of the changes from the year before. But either way, it's going to keep us in business, right?
And not to mention, absolutely. Not to mention, I mean, the other thing too, and I'm sure you felt it this preseason, we saw it a little bit last year, but COVID was still a little wonky. But this was such a calm preseason in the sense that, knock on wood, there were very few fantasy landscape changing injuries or obvious role changes, and we, like you said, we had tremendous player movement and coaching movement and changing of systems, but and I think this is going to be the way it is from now on, we just got so little on field data, right? All we had to go on were how much we could parse from the training camp reports, right? And that is never going to be as predictive as the old days when coaches actually played their starters for 1.5 to 2 games of game time in the preseason. And we just don't have that anymore. And we probably never will. So,
yeah, I think one of these things that captures this, just an aphorism, like September's the new preseason. I know the waiver wire seems really terrible right now. I think some of that is because the defenses are owning the offenses. I think we're going to see that this weekend too. I think they're going to have more defensive stalemate games, like that Denver San Francisco game, but things will continue to thaw out and change, and we'll try to stay nimble and flexible and know that you have an OFBG, Jason Wood, on your side, weigh his projections, my projections, moral, the supercomputer. So we got you covered, football guys, and it's great that all of y'all take time out to spend time with us while there's real football on, really interesting football, as even, again, this is showing you Teddy Bridgewater and his effect on this team to say, hey, we still got a football game to play, guys. And that we're seeing now the Bengals driving. We got a good game ahead of us. Thank you, everybody, for taking time out to join us. As always, thank you for supporting Football Guys. Remember, you can get month-long subscriptions now. So if you want to try it out, see what you think, sign up for a month. I think you will see as many people have.
Or buy a lifetime subscription. It's worth it.
Sure. Yeah. And I think you'll see, folks, we over-deliver. We always over-deliver. Because we love it. Because this is what we enjoy doing. And you make it enjoyable for us always because you're so classy.